Drake. As of recently, this maple syrup sipping motherfucker has been turned into a target for every person in the multiverse to dunk on, and his disses from every dark crevice and roomy dumpster of the internet rain down upon him like hellfire. I have to wonder, did this poutine eater ever make good music? Or is it just nostalgia from the golden age of modern rap clouding people's judgment? Now, before all the DJ Academics clones dox me, I have to explain this thought. See, I never liked Drake, and I always thought his music was shit. All the hits off of Scorpion sounded good to me for like 2 weeks, before if I heard God's Plan one more fucking time, I would have to take a Spider-Man leap of faith off a fucking bridge. And I was like 7 years old when that shit dropped. The Drake songs I did like back then, Going Bad, Life's Good, Sicko Mode, his ass was being hard carried by better artists. Artists who wrote all the lyrics and chose the beats, and only let Drake hop on the song because he has industry cred. So even when Drake had reached his peak popularity, I still found his music boring. And then he proceeded to shit out uninspired, whiny, and boring ass songs that were cobbled onto atrocious albums. So by the time COVID hit, I just entirely avoided Drake, deeming having to listen to his shit a fate worse than Chinese water torture. What's weird though, is once in a full moon, I would hear something like, Drake used to make good music, Take Care is a top 100 album. So I started to wonder, did Drake actually ever make good music? A year later, I saw Take Care sitting at fucking top 50 or some shit on Apple's top 100 albums. Then I low-key felt like I had to listen to it, just so I could trash on the list even more for putting a shitty ass Drake album on it. So I listened to the album, and as I expected, it's nowhere near the hype. Now, this album is clearly more artistically inspired than any other part of Drake's discography, due to it actually having a theme. There were a couple songs in the album that got my head moving a couple centimeters, but it is still a Drake album. I could barely get myself to fully listen to the album. I was in a sleep-like state by the time I reached the Nicki feature. It's also a long-ass album at 18 songs. A fucking Drake album should not be 18 songs long. And for me and my fucked attention span, an album has to be incredible for me to listen to the full double album. And this shit ain't The River, it isn't Pimp a Butterfly, it isn't London Calling, and it definitely isn't The Wall or Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. The music on this album is decent. There's some good songs on it, but at the end of the day, it is still Drake. See, the album might be more artistically inspired than his later music, more R&B influenced than his later music, equipped with better beats than his later music, but at the end of the day, he is still a mediocre artist at best, hiding behind all that. Let me explain. To quote my 6th grade social studies teacher, Drake isn't a very good rapper. His style of rapping to me sounds like white noise. Drake, in my eyes, sounds like a failed mumble rapper, but somehow before mumble rap was a thing. This leads to Drake having to rely on R&B elements in this album, like his singing, which is really good in this album, but Drake's goal isn't to be an R&B artist, it's to be a rapper. This puts him in a middle ground that would be innovative in 1992, but mixed with Drake's trend-hopping tendencies, comes off sounding like fucking Justin Bieber, but a Justin Bieber that can kinda rap and say the N-word. And these elements in Drake's music are the last thing I want to hear on an album that Apple put in the top 100 best albums of all time. Yes, that list was shit, but something that sounds like Justin Bieber has no business being there. Now, in truth, Take Care doesn't really sound like 2010's favorite slightly racist white boy. There are a couple of similarities. Maybe it's the way Drake sings certain lines, or the synthesizers, or the bass, but most likely it's the way the R&B influence is expressed in both these pieces of music. But me just being able to make this comparison shows that this album and Drake's older music in general is dated and time-stamped. You can tell this album was made in the early 2010s. And if time shows anything, trend-following pop music does not age like fine wine. Disto turned to fucking vinegar, and even though the songs on Take Care sound decent now, they will probably follow disco's path. A great album has to be timeless and get better every single time you hear it, and Take Care just doesn't do that. Now, I have been trashing on this album pretty hard. There are some things I like about this album, but the things that I like about this album are things that most albums do. So it feels like I'm congratulating a psychopath on having an ounce of humanity. One thing this album does is have a theme. Not a normal Drake theme that is created to try to sell the album, but an actual theme that is explored, explained, and developed. Also, the consistency of this album is good. Not having a horrible song on it, but a couple bad ones. And the beats on this album are decent, and in some cases, really good. Take Care is a good album that shows that Drake and his cult of ghostwriters can have some artistic vision and can make some decent and interesting music, or just find a way to steal more talented people's music and get away with it. But then how did Drake go from a decent album to the shit he makes now? The only way to figure this out is to look at Drake's other Golden Age albums. Going chronologically from Take Care, Nothing Was the Same was his next album. Compared to Take Care, it sounds a lot more like Drake nowadays, more rap focused, thus making it much worse. Rap is Drake's weaker side, as I have mentioned, and the extra dimension that Drake's singing gave to Take Care isn't really there in this album. Parts, mainly the hook that he does sing, come off sounding like a middle schooler whining about breaking up with his girlfriend. And the rapping is much worse than Take Care. His rapping on this album is him saying lines in a moist, critical sounding ass voice with a couple voice inflections. This leaves Drake sounding like some suburban white kid that's in show choir who just got the N-word pass and then decided to try his hand at rap. All these changes to Drake's singing and rapping makes the album feel less lively, and to top it all off, the beats have regressed from the level they were at on Take Care. All this combined paints an image of Drake leaving behind his rap R&B mix roots to chase the higher charting hip-hop music. This album, from my perspective, is the start of Drake's habit of making repetitive, inspiration-devoid albums. What made Drake good on Take Care was his singing mixed with a bit of rapping, and of course good, interesting beats to back him up. His next album, after Nothing Was the Same, is If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. This album marks the last album before Drake's transformation into a pop star and the end of his creativity. After this album, Drake never regains any of the talent he exhibited on Take Care. The beats on If You're Reading This, It's Too Late are better than the ones on Nothing Was the Same, and it's a better album overall. But Drake still has the problem that he low-key sounds like he sipped a gallon jug of lean before each recording. His rapping on this album is done with the enthusiasm of a 7th grade science teacher. On the song Know Yourself, the style benefits the song, but that style of rapping on energy, except for the first part of the song, kind of ruins the song for me, which is pretty depressing because the song has Drake's best hook. Even though the song is kind of iffy for me now, re-listen to it, I gotta say, the hook's still hard as shit. The rest of the songs on the album follow suit. Drake's rapping sounds too sleepy and boring to be considered really good. He does seem to wake up and rap well on a couple songs, thus this album is probably Drake's best studio album next to Take Care. The last album of Drake's supposed golden age is Views. This album sits in a weird space for me. The music on it returns to the sounds of Take Care in a way, because he sings way more than he did on his past couple albums. But the beats on Views still resemble those two albums. To me, this change in sound almost seems like a total sellout move by Drake, a declaration of his full conversion into a pop star. He started to sing again to appeal to a wider audience, as well as keeping his core fan base with rap songs that sound the same as Nothing Was the Same, and If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. The subject matter of the songs is the same as his other albums, to once again keep his core fans, who wouldn't listen to more clean pop songs. It still glorifies Drake's fucked up, the bear-type relationships with everyone around him, and still features him bragging about how he's the biggest and richest rapper in the world. All of these things combine together to try to net Drake on number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Though it comes off as a sellout album in my eyes, Views is still a decent album. Having covered every solo album of Drake's early mainstream career, it's a decent lineup. Probably on the same level of Elton John's first couple albums, but compared to, let's say, Kendrick Lamar's or Jay-Z's first couple studio albums, Drake's first couple albums pale in comparison. For one, Drizzy's albums are too long, and unlike most good double albums, their sound doesn't progress or change in any meaningful way, nor does the story or meaning. They do have good songs and are relatively consistent in how good their songs are, but no song on any of these albums got me in the mood to try to rush the stage and leave a couple people in cardiac arrest. Even though they're decently consistent, there are some bad songs on them. These are decent albums. Take Care, Drake's best album, is on the same level as Tunnel of Love, Springsteen's weakest album from his golden age. The rest of the albums are on the same level as No Line on Horizon by U2. Though If You're Reading This, It's Too Late might be slightly better than No Line on Horizon though. But then why are these albums seen as all-time great albums? I found a couple reasons why these albums are seen as gems in Drake's discography. Reason 1, nostalgia. By all things considered, the first 6 years of the 2010s were pretty fucking good for a lot of things. The recession was over, pop culture was thriving, the first couple phases of the MCU were in full swing, and The Force Awakens had just come out. Dark Knight Trilogy was being released, sports were exciting, and music, well, multiple modern classics had been released, like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, some other solid Kanye albums, Good Kid Mad City, Chanel Orange, Blonde, To Pimp a Butterfly, Finally Rich, and of course, what basic white girls consider to be the third testament of the Bible, 1989. Compared to the time when people were starting to look back on how good Take Care, its 3 following studio albums, was in 2022 and later, when it looked like rap was dying and music as a whole was too. Theaters were closed, all TV shows were getting canceled or delayed, and Drake had dropped Certified Boy Lover. And the thing said to be the hair-bringer of the apocalypse. Honestly, never mind. Drake fans, and hip-hop listeners in general, were looking back on the golden era of rap, thinking about how good it was. Thus nostalgia, combined with nails on a chalkboard sounding better than Drake at the moment, people started to see a couple decent albums as the pinnacle of 2010's rap music. Reason number 2, Drake's popularity. Drake at this time was on his come up. Take Care brought him into the mainstream and made him one of the most popular artists in the world. And if everyone is listening to something, your implant that connects you to the hive mind makes you listen to it too. Drake rode on that high mind for literally his entire career, especially after a run of 5 decent but very flawed studio albums that blew him up to the biggest artist in the world. Right after Views, Drake then pivoted to a hit hunting approach. He made sure to feature all the up-and-coming artists to stay relevant, and made sure to implement whatever style of beat was popular to sound up to date. If someone stays popular and has a steady stream of features that cover up his mediocrity and ghostwriters to write him a catchy hook, he can stay on top of the charts every release, which is what Drake has done for all of these years. And unless he creates an entire album almost devoid of features and less help from his legions of ghostwriters, and tries to be experimental, and the only song on that album that charts high is a basic non-experimental with a feature from one of the most popular rappers other than him, people will always listen to a popular artist, as long as that artist isn't heading for jail for sexual assault or for touching kids. Wait, hold up. Is Drake's career about to end? The reason why Drake being popular relates to this time period in music being seen as good, his music isn't good enough for him to be popular as he is. Thus, people will just assume or trick themselves into thinking that his older music is incredible when it's just good at its best. Because if that music's mediocre, then how did he get popular in the first place? Reason number 3. The music sounded good at the time, maybe. I find this reason hard to believe, considering at the time, when Drake was considered good, most of the contemporary albums and artists are some of the best in history. Here's the thing though. No rapper sounded quite like Drake up until that point. His style of rapping did not resemble any rappers from the 90s, 2000s, or even the early 2010s. And the singing that accompanied it was definitely new. And if something is new and popular, people are bound to like it, as I've mentioned. Drake innovated his sound, and nothing was the same, to a fresher, newer sounding rap, and made a couple changes to that sound over the next couple albums. Thus, he kept the retention of his fans. Then, Drake fucked up. He didn't innovate his music in any way for a while, and when he did, it wasn't to experiment and leave the mainstream sound, but the opposite. He would change his sound to something more mainstream and basic. Thus, his new sounding music became stale and boring. This leads to his older music sounding worse because it sounds the same as his new bad music. But why does the older music sound better? You see, Drake also regressed in his songwriting. Instead of writing complex lyrics, he wrote hooks. That change in songwriting is why his older music sounds better, because there's more depth and complexities, instead of the same line repeat over and over and over again. All this together leads to Drake's older music not living up to its hype, because his new music has oversaturated his sound. And with nostalgia and Drake's popularity, it gives delusional motherfuckers like DJ Academics the idea that Drake is a good artist.